Okay. Okay, so tonight we have Mary Birdsong, who's going to be our presenter. But before we get to her, I want to make a quick announcement that on March 15th, we will have Jared Clark will be presenting on Zoom about the birds of Newfoundland. So if you've ever been interested in Newfoundland and the birds you can find up there, please join us for that on March 15th. And then in April, on April 19th, we will have Ron Mummy, a retired ornithologist from Agony College, will be presenting on his work with hooded warblers here in Crawford County. So and that's going to be an in-person event at the Trek Center. So that is April 19th. But those are in the future. Tonight we have Mary Birdsong presenting about the agony and the ecstasy of the piping plover season, the 2023 piping plover season at Gull Point. I know that all of you know Mary, but let me give just a very brief intro. Mary is co-founder and lead shorebird monitor for Erie Bird Observatory. She has been monitoring shorebirds, particularly piping plovers, since 2015. She is active in Presque Isle Audubon and is also a freelance writer and artist. She shares her home with her husband, Mike Pyler, and two great tabby cats, and is the proud Busha to three granddaughters and one coming grandson on the way. And then before I turn it over to Mary, I want to make a quick mention. I am just dropping into the chat right now a link that I would love it before you left our talk tonight. If you would click on this link and share your thoughts about tonight's talk, about future ideas for talks. It's a feedback form that I'm trying to get feedback from the users. So please, before you leave the talk tonight, click on that. And then secondly, you are most welcome to drop questions into the chat throughout the talk. And after Mary's presentation, we will moderate and present those questions to Mary. And now I turn it over to Mary Birdsong, please.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here again. Thank you for having me. I hope you never tire of hearing about piping plovers, because I never tire of talking about them. As many of you know, we have piping plovers at Gull Point, and Erie Bird Observatory is a relatively new organization. We started in 2018. I always want to give a brief introduction to some of the programs for Erie Bird Observatory before we actually get into the season. A brief mention of our mission statement, which is to foster enthusiasm for birds and conservation through ornithological research and public engagement. And our oldest program is banding. It occurs at Fry's Landing at Presque Isle State Park. Banding has occurred since 1960 at the park, started by other people. It occurs in the spring and the fall. The banding station is open to the public at certain times. And you can check out our Facebook page, Erie Bird Observatory, or our Presque Isle Bird Banding Facebook page for days and hours of availability, which is always subject to change due to weather and various other considerations. We also do things like bird walks, kayak birding, and presentations like I'm doing tonight. We do marsh bird monitoring because least-in American bitterns are state endangered, and we, of course, collect data on the birds that inhabit the marsh, but we also help the park because it helps them understand how their invasive plant species mitigation is working. We also coordinate with utility companies to move osprey nests off of their equipment and onto safer designated platforms for the birds. One of our newest programs is Bird Safe Erie. We have routes downtown, and volunteers collect birds that have hit windows And we are essentially using this to build a database of the birds that are being affected by reflective glass, and so that we can work on collaborating with businesses and other organizations to help mitigate this. But we have to show the need before we can actually approach them. But it's a great program. The Lights Out program and Bird Safe programs in other cities are very well established, and we're pretty excited about getting this established here in Erie. And of course, one of the things we do is monitor for piping plovers and common terns, as well as other shorebirds. Great Lakes piping plovers are federally endangered. Common terns are state endangered. I'm not going to be talking about common terns this year because we didn't have any nesting at Gull Point, so there's really nothing to talk about. We actually saw very few common terns at Gull Point, so we'll be talking we'll be talking completely about piping plovers. The piping plover team is not just Erie Bird Observatory. We have a recovery team that is a collaboration between the Game Commission, Fish and Wildlife, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Western Pennsylvania Conservancy Natural Heritage Program, and as of last year, the USDA Animal and Plant Inspection Service, which helps us with predator control, because this was the first year that we've actually had predation or assumed predation of birds, and we needed to reach out to their services. So now we are working with them on a regular basis, and they are part of the team. So, and unfortunately, that has to be done. EBO is the eyes or boots on the ground for this operation. For the most part, we start monitoring on April 15th every year, and we monitor every 6 days a week until the last piping plovers chicks have left Gull Point. That can be in August or September. In 2022, it was actually September before they left, which was our longest season. It was 5 months long. Just a quick review for those of you who may be new to this presentation. There's approximately 8,000 piping plovers in the world, all of them in North America. There are 3 separate populations, the Great Plains and Atlantic populations. Of course, you can see here are considered threatened. They are far more numerous there's quite a few more in the population than there is. The Great Lakes population is much smaller, and it is considered endangered. As of 1984, it's an endangered species. Before it was listed as an endangered species, this was the historic nesting area of the Great Lakes plover. It included Erie. Erie was a historical nesting place. The last time that before 2017, they nested in Pennsylvania up until like the mid 1950s. We don't have an exact date, just that there's evidence that they were there in the mid 1950s. So the 1984, they were listed. This is the number of pairs on the left-hand side, the years across the bottom. Here they were listed. There was approximately only 12 or 15 pairs left in the population, known pairs in the population, all of them in Michigan. And several of the techniques, forgive me, my mouse is can be possessed sometimes. In 1988, 4 years after their listing, they started using an exclosure on the nests, and I will explain what an exclosure is later. And in 1993, a very unique technique called captive rearing. begins, where if eggs or chicks are endangered in one way, shape, or form, they are taken and actually bred or actually raised in a captive environment where they can be protected. And you can see in 1993 that the numbers start going up. So the combination of exclosure use and captive rearing has really helped the population grow. We've had some down years. In 2011, there was high water. We also had high water in 2020. And so that obviously you can see the numbers dip in those years. So high water on the Great Lakes does affect the success of breeding because it reduces the amount of available habitat. Just a quick tutorial on reading bands. This is our beloved Jerry, who arrived here in at Gull Point as a first-year bird in 2016. He was hatched on North Manitou Island in Michigan, but for some reason stopped here in May of 2016 and decided he liked it, and he stayed all summer despite the fact that he never found a mate. And then that was an indication that he really liked the territory. So we were hopeful that he would come back in 2017, and he did. And he did find a mate in 2017, and that was the first successful nest in more than 60 years at Gull Point. So he is our pioneer. These are, I'm going to use his bands to discuss banding, just because I like people to know what they're looking at, because if they're out birding and they actually see a Great Lakes piping plover, they may have a little background to be able to report it. Piping plovers are banded as chicks, and sometimes banded as an adult. The adult bands are this metal band, which all banded birds get. It's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Geological Survey band. It's metal, has a number on it, which cannot be read in the field, but it is has a number that is unique to the bird. The orange band with a flag on the back indicates that a bird is within the Great Lakes population. And the other band combinations are unique to the bird. No other adults would have the same combination of colors. And so each one is unduplicated, so we can identify individuals in the field. Now, in reading chick bands, is a whole different thing. Each bird, each nest that is known, the birds in each nest get banded, and they all get the same combination. This is a Presque Isle Gull Point combination that you're looking at here, which has the an orange band on the top left, not a flag, and then it has a black band on the lower left, the metal band on the top right, and another black band on the bottom right. What makes a brood band different, of course, besides the fact that it doesn't have a flag on the orange band, is they have a yellow, or they have a colored dot. So if there are 4 birds in a clutch, one will get a yellow band, another will get red, another will get blue, and another one will get green. And so we can identify each different bird in a specific clutch tied to a nest. They also get, They also get a number on one of their lower bands. And that is so to distinguish one set of birds from a particular location from another year's bird in that same location. And if you have questions about that, you can ask. I don't really want to get too technical on you. It can all be very confusing. Now, just a quick refresher for people who have been here before, but for other people who may not have. This is Presque Isle State Park. It's a recurve sand spit. It sticks out into Lake Erie. The prevailing currents from the west move sand, and prevailing currents and wind move sand from the west to the east, which creates an accumulation at this end, which is Gull Point, which is where where our birds nest and most of our shorebirds hang out. The designated critical habitat for the piping plover is from the lighthouse on the lakeside of the park out to and including Gull Point. The area just here on Gull Point is considered a designated natural area. From April to November, it is closed to the public. There is a roped trail that takes you to platforms where you can view the point from within the confines of that area. And Gull Point itself is a very dynamically changing environment. These are drone images from the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy from 2018, 19, 21, and 23. I don't have a 22, and I don't think they flew that year, or 20, which was during the pandemic. This is 2019, so you can see that we've lost some on the north, and a lot of it is curving back down to the south. And then this is 2021, where we've gotten even more aggregation down here at the bottom in the south. And 2023, this kind of is a little bit different. It's they got better drones. It's what happened here. But you can see that the southern tip is really growing, but we are losing material up here on the south, or on the north. So everything kind of wants to go south and east, and that creates not only from year to year, but from month to month, and sometimes day to day, the open areas, how much water is at Gull Point can change based on wind speed and current and prevailing current. The wind comes from the west, which actually is to your bottom left here in the photo. That this area right here that I'm circling with the pointer is a channel that goes into this pond. If wind is really high, it will push water into this area and create a much larger pond, and it can happen very quickly in the course of an hour or 2 hours or 5 minutes. And that actually is important to what happened this year. This is the viewing platform that's out at Gull Point that is near the end. It was sort of in the middle of the point, not so much in the middle anymore because the terrain is shifting southeast. And the good news is that they've actually built another platform that will be open to the public, and it is farther to the southeast, so you've got a better chance to see birds down there. From what I understand, that if for some reason the park feels that the birds are being disturbed by people, depending on where they choose to nest, that other platform will be closed to the public. We are allowed into the closed area under certain circumstances, but from most of my for a lot of my monitoring, I'm on this platform, and thankfully when I'm there, the vultures are not there. Just in general, because of the fact that I often monitor from the platform, and also have to keep my distance from the birds. A lot of the photographs you're going to see are taken through my scope with my phone, and so they are consequently not high quality. They might be blurry, and there's nothing I can really do about that, but it's more important to keep the birds safe than it is to get better pictures. April 15th, first day of my season, two old friends are already there. My Jerry and Eve. They were partners last year. They were mates last year, and they fledged 3 chicks in 2022, and were got right down to business and created a nest. And that is the image on the left is when I first found the nest, and the image on the right is when an exclosure had been installed over with the 4th egg in it. So that's our first nest of the season. And I'm going to talk about exclosures very quickly, just because if there's somebody here that doesn't know what an exclosure is, I want to make sure you know what that means. Oh, please. An exclosure is essentially a cage that sits on top of the nest. It is kind of wire fencing. It is designed not to keep the plovers in, but to exclude predators out. The ends get buried down into the sand. And they've also started using predator guards, these aprons or skirts that are buried underneath the sand around the exclosure, and that prevents animals from digging up under the edge of the exclosure and getting into the eggs, particularly things like mink and fox, or smaller mammals that might be a possum, which might get to the eggs. So once it's installed, this is pretty much how it looks. That's a mid-size exclosure, and it's over a nest. And you can see that there's also quote unquote game camera trap that the Game Commission deploys onto the nest. Not necessarily, I mean, we can use it, they can use it to look at the nest and see what's going on. But it's also to keep track of potential predators, because that's something that we like to know what's going on with predators. So that is exactly what that looks like. So we have our first nest. Jerry and Eve have laid 4 eggs, and they're doing their thing. They're sharing incubation and moving on. The bird on the left here, whose nickname is Ollie, and they get their names based on their band combinations. Jerry is an exception to that rule, but because Ollie is OL, and the X's are never used, and he is OL, and so he got the nickname Ollie. And he meets up with Lola, which is the bird on the right, and they both show up about the same time at Gull Point. Ollie is Jerry's son, and they start courting, and eventually create a nest, but not until we find out that Lola is actually Ollie's mom. So we're kind of like, we're thinking maybe we should have named Ollie Oedipus. And it's kind of funny, but it's also sort of not great, because you don't want genes that similar to mesh. But nonetheless, they decided that they were going to have a nest together, and they did. For some reason, they only produced 2 eggs. We're not sure exactly why or why not. They didn't do 4. The typical nest is 3 or 4, but they stopped at 2. And we don't know if it was a mother-son issue or something, but we were happy to have them. And both eggs are hatch on June 20th. And here's one of the chicks. The other one is still hiding under dad in the exclosure. The camera traps help capture these kinds of images that we can't ever see directly. But alas, despite the fact that these birds are doing well, Nest One started having trouble. We lost Jerry. We are assuming that he was predated by a merlin or a falcon or some other really fast bird with sharp claws, because he was a pretty wily bird, and it would take something really great to capture him. And leaving Eve alone to tend to the nest, which is something that really plovers cannot do, because their modus operandi is to share incubation duties. And without both mates, the remaining mate will oftentimes abandon the nest. And that's where captive rearing steps in. The eggs were salvaged and taken, as always, to the Detroit Zoo. We put them in a local incubator. They get transferred in the incubator to the Detroit Zoo, and they're cared for until they hatch. And then they're transported to the captive rearing facility in northern Michigan. It's Pellston, Michigan. And there's a variety of people there who I think zookeepers from different parts of the country come and spend, time during the season raising them. And they have all kinds of various techniques to kind of try to keep the situation, the growing situation, as similar as it can be to the natural environment. And you can see here a feather duster in this picture. And they provide habitat like the warmth and the sand and a mirror so that they can identify each other as plovers. They recognize themselves. But the feather duster, when I first saw it, was kind of a mystery. But then I learned that the feather duster impersonates an adult plover, and the chicks will actually run under the feather duster like they would under an adult plover to brood, to gain warmth and feel secure. In the first week of life, they cannot regulate their body temperature, so they rely on a parent to warm them back up. And of course, that also is a very safe place for a little chick to be, little teeny tiny chicks. But so our nest one eggs have been gone to captive rearing. Nest two eggs, we'll talk about a little bit more when we do a summation. But Eve decides that, she's not done for the year. And so she takes up with another male that has been at Gull Point. And that was actually Jerry's grandson and Ollie's son. So we've got quite the dynasty going on there. She takes up with, we're going to call him Ollie's son. We actually don't have a nickname for him. And Eve, because she's YYV. So that's how she got the Eve nickname. And they end up, well, I thought I had a picture of their nest. I do not. Okay. Anyways, I apologize. They create a nest, and unfortunately, that nest is in an area where gulls regularly rest in large quantities, and the gulls began harassing the nest in general, pecking at the exclosure and doing things that they saw as an intrusion into their space. And at the same time, Eve goes missing, and Jerry's grandson is left alone. And of course, because of that, the eggs are salvaged, and they too go to captive rearing. So this is part of the agony of our season, that we've lost Jerry and we've lost Eve, and we've had two nests, the eggs from two nests taken away and gone to captive rearing. We, of course, would love to have them wild fledged here. They're still our birds, but they're just getting, incubated elsewhere. So, but because that we've had these predations, we start looking at ways to perhaps mitigate opportunities for predators and try to reduce their impact. And the two top predators were the gulls, as I mentioned before, and falcons. And this happens to be a peregrine falcon in the top left, and it's perched right in front of actually the exclosure remaining from nest one. The eggs have already been salvaged from there, but it's sitting right there by the exclosure. And you can see that it's on a piece of driftwood that is a perfect perch. And the gulls on the bottom right, you can see how close they are to the exclosure, and you can see an adult plover sitting on the nest. And they regularly were harassing the nest, and we don't know if honestly, we don't know if Eve took off because of the harassment, if she abandoned because of that. I mean, if she shows up this spring, that'll be amazing. But we can assume that she was predated. But anyways, we put predation mitigation into effect. The team did a lot of talking, and we came up with some plans. One of the things that we did was to cut down driftwood, or at least roll it over with to remove any potential perches that would make it easy for merlins and peregrines to hunt, to perch there and attempt to hunt at the point. We're not stopping them entirely, but we were trying to remove them from the areas where we thought they would do the most damage. We also deployed decoys, like the fox decoys, the fake ones up at the top, fake gull effigies, which is the one at the top left. We used actual dead gulls. We put them where we didn't want the gulls to hang out, because if there's a dead gull there, the other gulls will not want to roost there. And we also buried fish in places where we didn't want the birds to congregate. They all, they will eat, they eat fresh dead birds, and will stay in an area if plenty of those things. And we also added additional monitoring hours. We had a couple of our assistant banding manager and our intern were approved as official monitors. And so we did a morning shift and we did an afternoon shift or evening shift just to have more presence out there. We also moved all of these decoys as much as possible without interrupting or disturbing the plovers. And the last thing that we deployed was a scarecrow, or a scare gull, I guess. And it was built by Tim Hoppy from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And he got the name Scary Larry because Laris is the scientific name for the gull species. And so we were scaring Laris, and so he got named Scary Larry. You can see that on the right, that's when he was first deployed, and there's on the left, he kind of relaxed into his role later in the season with a lot of fading. And we actually found a pair of pants out there and put him on there so he could look all 1970s leisure suity. He oftentimes was affected by the weather. And sometimes he was kind of lost his head or body, as the case may be, and we had to rebuild him. But all of these decoys and deterrents were moved around as best as we could in an attempt to keep the predators on their toes. We also brought in, as I mentioned before, wildlife services from APHIS. They're part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It is the American, oh gosh, I always forget what that stands for, and I should write it down. It's essentially agriculture inspection and whatever, but wildlife services is about predator control, and they came out in an attempt to 3 times to capture a juvenile peregrine falcon that was frequenting the point. They used a perch trap, which is what you see on the right. Essentially, it's a pole that has a small trap on it. These do not hurt the bird. And then also what's called a goshawk trap, where they put a live pigeon in the bottom, and the bird can come in from the top in an attempt to get the pigeon. The pigeon is not harmed, and the trap closes over the top of it. Unfortunately, these methods were not successful. We never captured any peregrine, and it has led to a sub team of predator management team that is meeting regularly to discuss how we can improve what we're doing and improve protection for the birds. And that includes like changing the exclosure structure, and deploying different devices, and also about how we communicate with each other and how we can get folks out to Gull Point to do some kind of predator management more quickly. So that's, you don't think that it's going to be complex, but when you have so many agencies working together, it can really, every little detail has to be nailed down. And since this is all new, we're all working at trying to make it work and how we can improve it, and we'll get there. We are learning from other areas in the Great Lakes that have had predator management in the past. Hopefully we will be able to be more sophisticated in our attempts for the next year. Now, okay, so we have 2 nests that have been removed. The eggs have been removed to salvage and gone to captive rearing. And we have nest 2, which still has 2 chicks that have hatched and are growing up and learning how to be little plovers. And they're doing well. And this whole time we've had this guy, who's a very mysterious bird because he shows up, he has no bands on his legs, so we have no idea where he came from. And we honestly thought that, and when it first arrived, that it was a female based on the plumage, that the neck band isn't very complete, and the eyebrow doesn't go all the way to the eyes, and we think, oh, okay, we've got a girl, but it wasn't being courted by any of the males. And then once after Jerry disappeared, this bird started courting Eve. He did not succeed because Jerry's grandson succeeded. And so we named him UB for you, unbanded, B, bird. And he was, and after Eve disappeared, so we have Jerry's grandson and we have UB, 2 males, 2 bachelors, hanging around at Gull Point, twiddling their wings because they've got nothing to do because there's no more females. Then this gal shows up and she is dubbed the widow from New York because she nested at Sandy Lake State Park in New York on Lake Ontario. And but her mate was lost, and her eggs were salvaged and went to captive rearing as well. And then she left, decided to check out some new territory, and she ended up at Presque Isle, and she found Yubi, and she decided that he would be a good second chance at another nest. So surprise, surprise, kind of late in the season, we end up with a fourth nest. We weren't really expecting one. Oh, excuse me, needed some water. But unfortunately, they chose a very low-lying area in which to nest. It's a small pond that is susceptible to flooding when there's a rain event, or when there is high winds that push the water into that pond, which is, I showed you that earlier on the map. And inevitably, we were worried about that particular area. And lo and behold, yes, it did get the nest was inundated during a rain event, and the eggs were salvaged yet again and put in local incubation. And it was decided that we were going to try to raise the nest, something that we've never done at Gull Point. The EBO and myself and the Game Commission and Fish and Wildlife went out and actually raised the nest by about 6 to 7 inches above where it had been. And you can see this is the method we use. We actually put like a cone around the nest, and the fake eggs are in this nest, and the picture on the top left is just a recreation of the event. You don't see any eggs in that nest, but essentially we dug down on the side, we put the shovel underneath the nest, and we set it aside, and then we built up the area where the nest was. And then we put the eggs, or put the nest back on top of the thing. And then, of course, we have to wait to see if the birds will accept it, which they did. And everything was going great until about a week and a half later, we had a sesh. A sesh is where large quantities of water move from one side of a body of water to the other side of a body of water, like water in a bathtub. And we had water coming into that inlet very quickly, rapidly. Myself and a DCNR intern had to rush out there and find the eggs. Had already washed away. And this picture is from the game camera, and it is me. Essentially, I got out there, and the real eggs were gone, and I had fake eggs with me to put in the nest, but I couldn't because there was so much water. But I put them in anyways and watched what happened to them and where they floated, and I figured that is the direction my real eggs are. So I had to turn around because they actually started floating towards me, turned around, and then Lewis and I went very carefully, walked behind us, and about 5 or 8 feet away, we found the eggs kind of bobbing up against a little high spot. And we put them in a container, and somebody from the Game Commission came out and got them. And then later, when the water subsided, fake eggs were put into the nest. And at this point, we were all determined to not salvage these eggs and send them to captive rearing, because for goodness sakes, we were going to get these eggs through the whole process. So what happened was, rather than just raising the nest again, we actually moved the nest, and we moved it about 25 meters away from its original location. And here is some images of what we did. We kind of created a more sophisticated system for nest moving. These are fake eggs that you see here. They are not real plover eggs. We moved the nest with fake eggs in them. We essentially put this hard plastic ring around the nest and kind of nestled it down. And then we took a pizza peel, a small pizza peel, and shoved it under, slid it under so that we could lift the nest and move it a matter of a few feet away, and then completely rebuild everything, and then make sure that the birds could find the new nest location and accept the nest as it was. This was a 6 to 8 hour process because we moved the nest 6 times. And we started here, and you can see that it's in a wet location, and we moved it different distances each time. This first move was very successful. Every time that we did a move, we had to put the exclosure back on the nest, and then leave the area and watch and make sure that the birds came and accepted and started incubating again. And so that was like 15 minutes to a half an hour to an hour, depending on how long it took them to find the nest and whatever. When we did the second move, we moved it a little too far for them, but they eventually found it and eventually accepted it. But we decided that we weren't going to move that far again. So we did it in smaller increments. And you can see the final nest up here on drier sand above what's called the rack line, and that's the high water line. And we moved it essentially 25 meters, 82 feet. And it took all pretty much on July 15th. It was a Saturday. And we it didn't finish until the evening. And so because of that, we decided we use Fish and Wildlife, and the Game Commission decided that they weren't going to put the real eggs back in the nest that evening. They were going to do it the next morning. So they did go out and put the real eggs back in the next morning. And lo and behold, that evening, they hatched. They started hatching, which was really amazing because we got those eggs back in the nest just in time. And 2 hatched that evening, and 1 hatched the following day. Here's a picture of one of the adults and 1, 2, 3 chicks. You can't see an egg in there, but there's still an egg in there, the 4th egg. We weren't sure what was going on with that 4th egg. It was kind of, since it didn't hatch, we thought, well, maybe it's not viable. Something happened in all the moving and artificial incubation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We thought it wasn't going to hatch, but on the 3rd day, I was tasked with going out to listen to the egg. I was supposed to listen for movement in it. I got out there and was about to get into the enclosure, and I decided, I better look at this thing first. And I looked, and there was a hole in it. And my first thought was, oh, something happened. It's not going to hatch. The hole in it is, something bad that occurred. And I looked a little closer, and it was actually moving, and I could see a little beak sticking out of the hole in the egg. And I'm like, voila, we have a 4th, and it's finally hatching. And so that was actually some of the ecstasy part of the year, the season, because we managed to, despite the trauma that these eggs went through, all 4 of them did hatch. And that was pretty exciting. These chicks became very, very special to all of us because we went through a lot of work to get them to this point, and we were very, very happy. But of course, there's a little more agony to endure this season. And here is their release on, yeah, by the time we banded them on July 26th, one of the chicks had already disappeared, and we only had 3 chicks. And here is their release after banding. You listen closely, you can hear the adult peeping at them. And you can see them running. Now, and the adult that was peeping was the dad. Unfortunately, the female had already taken off, even though the birds were only, 7, 8 days old, depending on when they were hatched. And now females tend to leave early anyways, but this female left early in the course of the timeline of this particular nest. And we can only imagine it was because she already had a nest in New York, and then she came here for a second try, and her migration instincts kicked in, and it was time for her to leave. Now, typically the female does leave early and leaves the male to tend the chicks until they fledge. But unfortunately, the male left as well. And so we ended up with 3 chicks that were pretty much untended by an adult male. And unfortunately, because of this late season, that can happen. And because they didn't have the protection they needed, all 3 of them eventually disappeared. And we didn't have any wild fledges out of that nest. And we were all kind of heartbroken about them because they were very special chicks. To get back to our nest 1, captive rearing, sorry. The 4 chicks from nest 1 successfully fledged. They were released at Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore on June 30th. One has been sighted on the wintering ground on the Gulf Coast of Florida at Outback Key at Fort DeSoto. And I'm happy to say that I actually got to meet this bird, and I named him Jevy, and it's a combination of Jerry and Eve. And I don't know if we don't know if it's a boy or a girl yet, but in a very I thought heartfelt gesture, the banding crew that banded these chicks, they get full adult bands if they're born into captive breeding. They actually gave them the blue and yellow of Jerry's bands. All the chicks got the blue and yellow. So we were really kind of touched by that. We thought it was very a lovely tribute to such stalwart of the Gull Point process, Gull Point experience. And 4 chicks from nest 3 successfully fledged, and they were released at Tawas Point State Park in Michigan on July 31st. And here's a nice video of them heading out into the wild for the first time. Oh, they're so cute. So, at Gull Point, we only had 2 successful chicks wild fledge. They were Ollie and Lola's chicks. So maybe there's something to be said for inbreeding. I don't know. They fledged and left for migration in August. Our season ended on August 16th this year. And across the Great Lakes in general, across the Great Lakes in general, we have gone from 2021 with 74 pairs. We've actually gone up to 80 pairs, which is a new record since listing. And we had 137 chicks in the wild, 136 137 chicks fledge in 2021, and this year was very successful with 167. But I'd like to point out the difference between 2022 and 2023, because we had a total of 160 and 167, but in 2022, 150 of them were in the wild and only 10 were captive reared. But in 2023, 39 of them were captive reared. And I want to give a hat tip to the people in the captive rearing program, because that is a heck of a lot of plovers chicks to take care of over the course of a season. And I just imagined it was probably a wild season for them. I think that tied a record for chicks in captive rearing, but I don't know specifically. It's either tied or like one under. That's a lot of captive rear birds to deal with, and I applaud them. Since 2021 or 2017, when we had our first nests, we have produced 37 fledges. As I mentioned before, we had 4 unique pairs, 4 nests. We only had 2 wild fledged and 8 captive reared fledged. In general, our season was 7 adult plovers, 4 nests, total of 14 eggs produced. Nest 2 created the wild fledged chicks. Nest 1 and 3, the captive reared chick, and nest 4, we lost 4 chicks. Overall, though, it was an amazing season, and definitely successful in terms of having so many nests at the same time. It was the first time we had 4 nests at Gull Point. We've only had 2 in the past. A lot of it is due to this guy. This is just my little tribute to the old Jerry. In his lifetime since 2017, he helped produce 44 eggs, and he fledged 23 of the 37 chicks that we have produced, that we have contributed to the Great Lakes population. And that makes him an absolute legend. And he will, he's tattooed on my heart and my left ankle. And he might not still be living, but he is living on in his progeny. And I'm going to get a little choked up here because this bird means a lot to me. We spent 8 years together. So I just want to once again thank our partners, the Game Commission, Fish and Wildlife, Department of Conservation, Army Corps of Engineers, Natural Heritage Program, and the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. That's what it stands for, of the USDA. And remind everybody that saving plovers is a team effort. EBO cannot do it alone. Game Commission can't do it alone. Fish and Wildlife can't do it alone. We're all have to be a part of that effort. Your part is to, and I know probably you all know this, keep your pets leashed when at the beach. Please don't take your dog to Gull Point, even if they are on a leash, but just in case. Honor all the area closure signs, pay attention. If you're out at Gull Point, use the roped trail. Don't go out onto the beach. There's, besides piping plovers, there's spotted sandpipers, there's killdeer, and I know killdeer probably aren't that exciting to a lot of people, but nonetheless, they are birds that need to nest. And of course, there's also birds that are feeding and resting in those areas, and we don't want to disturb them. If you do come across a bird that has some kind of Great Lakes looking bands, you can report them to plover@umn.edu, and they will probably let you know where the bird came from. If you are accurate with the banding combination, whatever you can see, photographs are always nice. That helps all the scientists track where birds go. how birds are affected by the habitat that they summer in and winter in, and it really helps. It's just one more piece in the puzzle that helps them figure out what's going on and how they can better help the birds. If you want to know more about Erie Bird Observatory, there's our website, our handles on X and Instagram and Facebook. And I believe that's it. I'll be happy to take questions. I'm
Yeah.
going to stop sharing my screen.
Bravo, very good. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we've got a number of
Oh.
questions in the chat. Frida asked early on when you were talking about the changing dynamic of Gull Point, and she asks, how does the sand enrichment program impact how the beaches migrate around the corner?
The sand replenishment that gets the sand that gets put down at some of the beaches farther west, especially in winters like this, ends up moving to Gull Point. So it builds Gull Point in certain places. Before the breakwaters were put in, the sand accumulated more on the north side, but it is the breakwaters change the dynamics, and so it moves it in different places. I mean, I've watched it. I don't have a long-term knowledge of how, you know, the terrain has changed. But I know that it is building. We're losing sand on the north side and we're gaining sand in the southeast. So, and a storm can change anything, anytime.
Reverend Beth says, "Love the photo with all the chick eggs or chick legs." Excuse me. That was an adorable photo.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about how old can plovers get in the wild?
I think they have a plover in Michigan now that is up to 16 years.
Wow.
And I was confident that if Jerry did not get eaten, he would have lived that long. He was a cuss. As Sarah once said, he chases Kildare just for fun. He had spit and vinegar. He was the most attentive parent out of every plover I've ever seen. He was always watching those chicks. He was always, you know, any perceived danger or threat, he was moving them. He was protecting them. He was stepping right in to fight that whatever it was that was attempting to hurt his chicks. And he was very attentive around the nest as well, even beforehand.
Pat Rossi writes, "Love your earrings." Yeah, those are some pretty cool piping plover earrings you got there.
Thank you.
And then Miriam asks, is there any documented immigration into the Great Lakes population from the Plains and Atlantic populations, and vice versa? Any emigration of Great Lakes piping plover to the Plains or Atlantic populations?
There have been some Great Lakes birds that have nested on the East Coast. I don't know about the Great Plains population. I don't hear a lot about the Great Plains population. There is speculation that the unbanded bird that came here last year could have been from the Atlantic population. He was much paler than a typical Great Lakes plover, because the Great Lakes and the Great Plains plovers are browner mantled, and they kind of match the habitat that, you know, they're on rivers in the Great Plains, and the Great Lake beaches are usually browner than East Coast beaches, you know, and the birds in general on the Atlantic are much paler. When I was in the Bahamas doing a winter survey, you could see the difference between the Atlantic birds and the Great Plains or Great Lakes birds. They actually took DNA samples from the chicks of nest 4 in hopes of learning where their DNA came from.
Right.
I haven't heard back from that yet. We're going to be having a preseason meeting and I will ask. Nothing's been offered so far, but sometimes the wheels of science turn slowly. So
It might be interesting to think about the genetic diversity to like maintain diversity.
we would love some great genetic diversity, especially since, we have nest 2, which is mother and
Yes,
son.
yeah.
Yeah, and it would be lovely to get some fresh Atlantic coast plover blood going on in here. And it's quite possible that those 2 birds will come back in 2024 because they were both, shall we say, successful. I mean, as far as they were concerned, they had 4 chicks and they, were successful. And so female plovers are attracted more to a successful nest and have more of a tendency to return. Males are more tied to their territory and will return. And of course, there's no guarantee that they will. It all depends if they live or die, or if they, who knows? Eve, the female that we lost this year, that was Jerry's mate, had also nested in Michigan and also in Ontario. She moved all over the place before she settled down here. So, everything is just, they don't read the book. So,
Wild animals.
yeah.
So Carolyn has got a couple of questions for you. First one is, excuse me, what part of Gull Point is the habitat most used by plovers? North side, wraparound side, base side? And her second question, how many wild fledges have returned? Any captive fledges returned?
No captive fledges have returned, to the best of our knowledge. No, only wild fledges have returned. And I'll get to that other question in a second. We've had, well, Jerry or Ollie and Ollie's son. We've had others stop by but not stay. And we had, no, I think that's it. That's it. Now, as far as nest location, we have nests on the north side, but inland, not near the shore. We had nests in all 3 places this year. We had on the north side, we had one that was kind of halfway down the east side, and then all the way down at the new southeast section. But that wasn't a good location. The male is typically the one who builds scrapes, and then the female chooses which one she wants because he'll do multiple scrapes. And we actually think she was trying to convince him to like move farther up beach, because where they chose was like way too close to the gulls, and it was just not good. And I think that his inexperience as a mating bird kind of contributed to that choice. So, I mean, they tend to choose better sites the older they get. Did I answer that question accurately? If I could put up a map, I could show you, approximate nest sites, but I'll try to remember to add that in other years.
That was good. So I have one more question. If there's any last questions, please get them into the chat now as we are coming up on time. But Miriam asks, do the captive fledges tend to return to their release areas in Michigan, Lake Huron? Why aren't they released in Lake Erie or by Lake Erie?
Excellent question. They always used to release captive reared birds in Michigan. And they started learning that those captive reared birds were returning to where they were fledged. And so to scatter them, to distribute them, they now started just this past 2023, they started releasing them at different places so that they would be distributed differently. It was an experiment to see what happens, but they're also talking about releasing captive reared birds now in even farther remote places like here or New York. But I'm not privy to those conversations. That's Fish and Wildlife. That's the Game Commission. That's, you know, the folks in Michigan that run the whole entire umbrella operation, and the university scientists. You know, they have far more access to the studies that have been done, and because I can't read all of them, I try. But and I don't have access to some of them. But yeah, I mean, they're starting to get a little more sophisticated and thinking about ways, because the theory used to be that the birds that are released, that the first year birds aren't tied to their natal site. And they will just disperse. And typically the males would be the pioneers into new territory. And that still holds true. But they started seeing an increase in birds returning to their natal site. And of course, that's bad for genetics. So, you know, I think it would be wonderful to get some birds from other captive reared locations fledge here, so that we could, you know, maybe they would come back here and we could increase our genetic diversity. Because that's our weakest link right now, is genetic non-diversity.
Do you know how long the captive birds, when they're released, how long they stay where they're released at before they migrate away?
Oh, I think that all depends on location. I mean, I've never experienced, you know, that. So I would think that it's weather and all sorts of things.
Carolyn asks, have they ever tried to nest outside of the Gull Point area on Presque Isle?
No, thank God. Put it this way, not that we know of. Now, we in general across the Great Lakes Basin, there has to be unknown nests in places that we are not aware of, because we end up with unbanded birds. So something's going on somewhere that we don't know about, because I've had unbanded birds before that have migrated through. So I know that they sometimes spend time, like Jerry used to fly over to Beach 11 on a regular basis.
Huh.
He would go out on a little holiday and go over to Beach 11 and forage over there for a while. Last year, Eve spent time down near the lighthouse for a while, and maybe even along Beach 10. So they spend time there, they forage, but they haven't nested anywhere else. The habitat probably isn't appropriate. In most other places, the tree line is too close. They want wide open spaces. They don't want trees nearby because they perceive that as a place where predators can perch.
So I have a question for you, Mary. Do you ever get antsy and go out before April 15th to just check things out? Or if you're going to encrypt yourself, don't answer.
No, I don't really get antsy, only because Sarah and I do have to go out a couple times anyways. We go out and put out numbered markers so that because we use them during the season as reference points in our reporting. That, you know, we start at a certain point on the north side as 0.1, and then we have 2, 3, 4, usually through 11 or 12, depending on how it all gets put out. And those numbers are our reference guides for the whole team during the season, because it's just so much easier to refer to the number rather than trying to describe the location. And so we have to go out and do that. And then we typically go out with volunteers to do to put up the trail ropes. And I typically go ahead of that to put flags in the ground to mark where the fence posts go. So I am spending more time out there ahead of the season, but I haven't specifically gone out and get antsy. I get enough walking during the season, so I've, you know, I was very, very happy to see. When I went to Florida, I met Jevy, and I also actually went to Bunch Beach outside of St. Petersburg. I always get those two, Fort Myer. And that's where Ollie winters. So I got to see him on his wintering ground, which was so much fun, because I got to see him here, and I got down there and I'm like, do you know who I am?
That's great. You know, of walks out to Gull Point, a quick plug for EBO is that there is a Gull Point walk happening a week from tomorrow. Now it's actually full right now. I believe that there's already 50 participants, which is a huge group to go out. But you can sign up on the EBO website. You can sign up and get on the wait list if you're interested. So if
Well,
you're
actually, you need to send me an email to be on the wait list.
Oh, really? Is that how it goes? All right. Well, you got to email Mary to get on the wait list then. So
Yeah.
yes. All right.
Actually, we had a couple cancellations. We're at 49.
Oh, cool. All right. So there
But
is a spot then for someone to email you then. So all right,
yes,
great.
yes.
Mary, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to share the agony and ecstasy of the 20.
And
And
hopefully,
Jerry,
hopefully,
and I love that. I really love that. Yes.
hopefully 24 will be all ecstasy and not agony.
Definitely. Definitely.
Well,
Right.
thank you for having me. It's been fun, as always.
Boy, it'd be great if you could get this story out to the wider community. I miss the old days when the Erie Times News would do stories on such a thing, and now they're down to bare bones. And yeah.
Well, I just saw Carolyn. I don't know if she sent a message to me alone or to the group. She said, write a book. And I'm like, yes, I know. I need to write a book. I'm a writer, for goodness sake. And it's actually, there actually is an outline on my computer, but it's just a matter of getting to it. I somehow feel like the story isn't finished.
Yeah.
And that's the problem that I'm having. But I know I could be building it as I go, but you know.
That's great. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was nice sort of seeing everybody. Have a good one.
We will be back on Zoom on March 15th for the Birds of Newfoundland. So come join us next month. Yes.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Good night.
All right.